Welcome to More to Know, a podcast to explore beyond the headlines. In every episode, we'll take a look at a topic and bring together different voices on the subject who are experts or directly involved. We'll talk about what's in the news, science, technology, some sports, and just things that have more to know. We'll bring you a new episode every 2 weeks, so make sure to like and subscribe. I'm your host, Christopher Conover. In this episode, more to know about data centers. What are they? Why are some communities embracing them while others are pushing back? And what's the future for these literal tech giants? When I first started podcasting about 7 years ago, big data meant either massive spreadsheets my fellow investigative reporters and I loved, or the electronic music project Big Data, which, by the way, I thought had a great riff for a podcast based on big data. But now it means so much more. And for communities across the U.S., big data means big data centers. Before we get too far into what different communities in the U.S. are doing with data centers, let's get some definitions. For that, we turn to Dr. Demetrios Nikolopoulos from the Department of Computer Science at Virginia Tech University.
It's a building which can be the size of, let's say, 2 football stadiums for what we call hyperscaler that houses many racks of computer systems, racks of servers, right? They look like cabinets where you have inserts, and in those inserts you have what we call computer blades. So you have boxes that host processors, memory, storage, networking equipment. They're called hyperscalers just to emphasize the sheer scale, the number of machines that these facilities can host, which may run in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, with millions of components within the machines. And the term data center, of course, is familiar, but they were coined data centers quite a few years back, right? So even though they are more widely known now, because they could just host a massive amount of data, and they could do it on behalf of many people, many organizations, so that they don't need necessarily private computing equipment to store everything. Data centers would actually give you an extra hand, a helping hand in providing you with a lot of storage capacity managed by experts or by software that is developed by experts.
So what makes a big data center a hyperscale versus just a very large data center?
There's no mathematical definition, so there's no number that indicates that this is a hyperscaler. It's not a hyperscaler, but I think anything on the size of a football field to 2 football fields would be something that would be definitely considered a hyperscaler these days. And then now you have, of course, campuses of those things. So you may have several of those things on what they call a data center campus, which is the evolution of the hyperscalers.
That was Dr. Demetrios Nikolopoulos from the Department of Computer Science at Virginia Tech University. We'll hear more from him later in this episode. Now that we have some basic definitions to work with, let's put it on the ground in communities across the country. According to datacentermap.com, there are currently just shy of 4,000 data centers in the U.S., and no surprise, that number is growing. Virginia has the most with close to 600, followed by Texas, California, Illinois, and Georgia. Other states with more than 100 data centers include Oregon, Arizona, Ohio, New York, and Pennsylvania. Dr. Kyle Kopko is the executive director of the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania. Before that, he held the same position at the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. He says when a data center wants to open, there are plenty of things for local governments to consider.
We want to make sure that there's adequate stormwater plans in place. If there were to be an emergency incident at one of those types of facilities, do we have adequate fire coverage? What about EMS personnel? Obviously, there's some question too about how many new employees will come in to an area, which is great, particularly for a number of our rural communities that have experienced population decline. But then we also have to ask, do we have the right type of housing stock in place, for example, for that workforce? So it's really an opportunity, I think, for a lot of folks, but there's still these unanswered questions about how do you make it work? And then there's also those concerns that we've been hearing about. Well, is this going to be a major drain on the power grid? Is this going to make residential electric prices just jump through the roof? And I think that a lot of data centers that have been eyeing expansion in Pennsylvania are trying to come up with their own power sources.
Some of the property proposed for data centers in Pennsylvania is currently farmland, and that's raising questions. Recently, a farmer turned down $15 million to sell his land for the construction of a data center. Instead, he received $2 million from the Lancaster Farmland Trust, which will preserve the land when the farmer decides to retire. But Dr. Kopko says it's no surprise that data centers want farmland.
Generally speaking, it's the most coveted land really for development purposes because it's generally graded, it's able to be developed pretty quickly. Whether it's a data center, whether it's a housing development, some sort of other commercial or industrial use, it really doesn't matter. It's for the most part land that can be easily developed. And because of that, developers want to purchase those types of parcels. Now, that being said, we're at a point in Pennsylvania's history where we're seeing fewer and fewer people having the ability to go into farming, at least in terms of the capital investment up front. Now, we do have, if you talk to our colleagues in the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, the highest percentage of young people going into farming, but that tends to be really smaller operations, a lot of urban ag, things like that. Maybe those individuals don't have the opportunity to buy, 50, 100 or more acres just because the amount of capital that's needed, not only to buy the real estate, but the equipment too, and just, making sure that you have enough help. We've been seeing a number of farmers, age out of the profession. And so because of that, their sons and daughters may or may not, or other extended family members may or may not be able to go into farming. And so that leads to a situation of, well, how do I, transition this property if I'm no longer able to do it and none of my immediate family members are able to do it? That's when you start seeing folks look to other developers to take on the land.
In the end, for local officials, it's all about weighing the needs of history and the future.
County commissioners, township supervisors, borough council members, they want to get it right. They don't want to do something that fundamentally changes the characteristic of their community in a negative way. And they just want to make sure that they're making a smart decision. Everyone, I think, is well aware that we need better economic development opportunities in Pennsylvania. We have all the scaffolding to be extraordinarily successful as a Commonwealth. And we want to make sure that we have opportunities to attract and retain residents going forward. It's just that I think there's concern about going too far in one direction unchecked. And, this could be a situation where once you ring that bell, it can't be unrung. So you want to make sure you're thoughtful about the process and the development from the get-go.
That was Dr. Kyle Kopko, the Executive Director of the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania. When he brought up power a few minutes ago, Dr. Kopko hit on a point that is very much at the forefront of local debates about the construction of the largest data centers. Microsoft is building a data center in Pennsylvania. Their power plan? Reopen 3 Mile Island, a nuclear power plant closed a few years ago, but it became famous in 1979 when there was an accident at the facility. In the summer of 2025, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro held a news conference with the power company which will run the facility and celebrated the reopening. And he was particularly happy about the jobs returning to 3 Mile Island.
For all of you who left for a short period of time, welcome back. For all of you who had to find other work for a short period of time, welcome back to Central Pennsylvania. We love having you here. We're going to make sure you never have to leave again.
Despite the optimism of Governor Shapiro and others in Pennsylvania, there are those, including the former chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission during the first Trump administration, who say it will never happen because no nuclear plant has ever restarted in the U.S. That comment came despite the fact that the administration loaned Constellation Energy $1 billion in November 2025 to restart the reactor at 3 Mile Island, according to news reports. In southern Arizona, 2 data centers are planned near Tucson, and the debate is fierce in the community. But it is the power question that brought Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays into the argument. She's upset that Tucson Electric Power, a privately owned utility, was granted authority by the state utility regulator, known as the Arizona Corporation Commission or the ACC, to negotiate power rates with the owners of the data centers.
So we have challenged a contract that was signed between TEP and a major data center provider. This is the data center that was at issue in Project Blue. Formerly, I think Amazon was the entity behind that, but it's still sort of out there being proposed. And what we are saying to the Corporation Commission is please vacate that decision where they approved that contract because, number one, they have basically provided no transparency around the really nitty-gritty details of the contract. They have redacted an entire section of the contract, so the public in Tucson can't even see it. And then there is a provision in it that seems to allow the utility and the data center to change the rate. In other words, what the data center is charged by TEP whenever they want to, without the supervision and oversight of the Corporation Commission. And that's just not okay. That is unconstitutional. The commission sets rates, and we can't have these data centers getting to call the shots about what they get charged, because ultimately what then happens is other ratepayers, like residential ratepayers, end up picking up the tab. Nobody else gets to pick their own utility rate. I mean, wouldn't that be nice, right? And you get to just say, oh, I would like to pay, $1 less per kilowatt hour that I use. Well, that's just not the way it works, not for anybody apparently, except for this data center that, of course, TEP is trying to woo. I mean, the utilities love data centers because they're going to make a ton of money off of them. But the problem is these data centers use a lot of power. This one in particular in Tucson was going to use well over 200 megawatts of energy. And that means TEP and any other utility that inks one of these deals with these data centers is going to have to build a lot of infrastructure, build more power plants, build more transmission lines. And all of that ends up being put on all of the ratepayers because that costs money and that gets put into rates. That gets put into what's called the utility's rate base. And then the utility gets to earn a rate of return on that, and all consumers have to pay for it. So, how these deals get done is really important. And at a minimum, if the utility is going to do these deals, ratepayers should have access to the information.
Before Mays was Arizona's Attorney General, she was a member of the Corporation Commission, which is a statewide elected body. And she says when it comes to who gets to select rates for data centers, maybe another group of elected officials needs to get involved.
I think that the legislature could put some parameters around these deals. Ultimately, though, the Constitution gives fairly broad authority over rate making to the Arizona Corporation Commission. And I personally have always believed, as a former commissioner myself, that that's the way it should be. I think what the legislature can and should be doing is, saying, hey, wait a second, time out. Let's call it time out here and decide whether we want to be, as a state, the data center capital of the world. And I don't really think that we have the water, and I know we don't have the power, the electricity right now, supply in Arizona to be the data center capital of the world. And I just don't think Arizonans want that. I mean, I personally think that these data centers are sort of the cotton candy of economic development. You know, they feel good on the front end, but there's not a lot of real jobs on the back end. And so, you know, we have this like perfect storm of these data centers wanting to come to Arizona, but them having these really negative side effects. I think that the legislature could put some parameters around these deals. Ultimately, though, you know, the Constitution gives fairly broad authority over rate making to the Arizona Corporation Commission. And I personally have always believed, as a former commissioner myself, that that's the way it should be. So, you know, I think what the legislature can and should be doing is, you know, saying, hey, wait a second, time out. Let's call it time out here and decide whether we want to be, as a state, the data center capital of the world. And I don't really think that we have the water, and I know we don't have the power, the electricity right now, supply in Arizona to be the data center capital of the world. And I just don't think Arizonans want that. I mean, I personally think that these data centers are sort of the cotton candy of economic development. You know, they feel good on the front end, but there's not a lot of real jobs on the back end. And so, you know, we have this like perfect storm of these data centers wanting to come to Arizona, but them having these really negative side effects.
That was Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays talking about who has the legal right to set electric power rates for data centers in Arizona. Now, electricity is not the only utility issue when it comes to data centers. Water is also a player. It's used for cooling systems, and according to a 2024 Berkeley lab report, the large hyperscale data centers are expected to use between 16 billion and 33 billion gallons of water a year by 2028. In a state like Arizona, which is in the midst of a decades-long drought and negotiations for future water use of the Colorado River, water is a key issue. Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs told us she wants to charge data centers a surcharge for the water they use. That money would go to the Colorado River Protection Fund.
The idea is that most households pay an average of a penny a gallon, and so it makes sense that data centers would pay the same. This would be a fee set by the Department of Water Resources. Certainly, I'm sure there will be a lot of negotiation that goes into that becoming a reality or not.
Governor Hobbs is also calling for the elimination of a tax incentive for data centers to build in Arizona.
I want to recognize they are part of the high-tech economy that we're building here and really recognize their place in that. They create jobs, especially in construction, and communities are interested in having them because of the tax base that is there, the property tax. So, but we made a strategic decision to incentivize them. We are top 2 market in the world now, and so I think that incentive has worked. And you know, we have to find the right balance. Certainly not prohibiting communities that want them, but ensuring that they are paying their fair share. And that we're not subsidizing them on the back of Arizona's taxpayers.
Now let's circle back to Dr. Demetrios Nikolopoulos from the Department of Computer Science at Virginia Tech University. He and his colleagues recently did a study on hyperscale data centers and whether or not the tech industry needs them.
The growing of the size and the number of the data centers is contingent upon a projected anticipated growth of the need of this computing power by artificial intelligence. What is not clear yet is whether this demand is there or will be there, whether it will be even necessary for artificial intelligence to grow so much, meaning better artificial intelligence doesn't always mean necessarily larger models, right? So that need a lot more computers to host. It might be better models. It might be different models that have actually a smaller size than current models, but they do things differently. So I think the jury is still out there in terms of what AI models are the most promising or will be the most successful. in solving specific problems. The jury's out there in terms of whether we need indeed hyperscalers to house these models, or we can actually figure out ways to, let's say, encode these models or represent these models in ways that are more economical and they don't need so much computing power. So I think that I think there's a lot of speculation that we will just grow the current AI models and they are going to solve a lot of interesting problems, but that's not necessarily proven or reality, at least not in a scientific study of AI and computing systems. So that's why we argue that perhaps it's a time to consider how to do better AI, to identify where AI can be really good at solving problems in a way that is also sustainable, meaning that it's financially doable and it's doable in terms of the infrastructure required, without just speculating that we're going to just grow the infrastructure, grow the models, and just by their sheer growth, the models will solve the problems. Another major concern that we wanted to highlight was that the rate of growth of data centers at this moment is not sustainable. It will outpace, it will run out of energy. We will not have enough energy in the entire planet to power data centers, right? Forget about the other needs of humanity that we have, our daily needs. Just for data centers, if they keep growing at the rate at which they're growing now, we will run out of power, which is also why we see these days a lot of press and discussion around, the data center operators producing their own energy, because otherwise there's no way we can actually provide enough energy from the other source that we have to power up these data centers.
Dr. Nikolopoulos also says when a data center wants to come to town, communities should also think about the end benefit, not just jobs, but who's using the data.
So there is a disconnect between, so you have let's say, take any of your favorite big technology companies, and so they come to your town, let's say, and they plan to install a hyperscaler, and they try to argue what's the benefit for the community. The immediate benefit, cannot, you don't jump out of your seat when you hear the immediate benefits, right? So there might be some tax benefit that will materialize maybe many years later, because usually these operators get tax breaks from the state and the local government. There might be some job benefits, but they might be short-term or temporary. So construction, for example, long-term jobs are good, but few. So communities struggle to see especially rural communities, they struggle to see the immediate benefit. And then they all struggle to see the indirect benefit, saying, oh, it's Google, right? For example, oh, so you get all these nice things from Google or Apple. Again, because this is not necessarily a benefit that people resonate with, right? So there has to be something else there. There are missing bits there in terms of what does the community get back, right, for having this data center around. The building itself and the machines themselves and the company that the building actually is constructed by is not necessarily providing direct benefits, substantial direct benefits to the communities, right? So there's indirect benefits in terms of like potentially the services that we provide to the people, and this is where the thing breaks down. Imagine if you and me go to a meeting, say in Montgomery County here in Virginia, and we go to a community and we try to articulate, well, you know what Google does for you, or you know what Apple does for you, right? To convince them to house a 700-acre, 50, 100 megawatt facility, right, next to pristine kind of like land that they have here. So it's a very hard sell, right, to do that. So there is a missing bit there in terms of what these things return to communities. So there has to be something there, whether it is, for example, energy return from the data center, where there is, these data centers can actually be centers of a broader ecosystem of, I don't know, businesses or companies. Something more has to happen, I think, besides the building and the machines, for the communities to appreciate the value of this.
That was Dr. Demetrios Nikolopoulos from the Department of Computer Science at Virginia Tech University. And that's it for this episode of More to Know. join us next time when we head down to the local on the corner to get a cold one. But you may notice there are fewer people on the bar stools, and that frothy lager is joined by lots of new flavors. So we'll hear there's more to know about the beer industry in the US and abroad. So make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. TJ Spiker produced this episode, and our music is by Enter the Haggis. I'm Christopher Conover. Thanks for joining us.